Hey guys, hope you guys are doing good today. Today I'm going to be talking about an important concept called file input and output in Python. And so by the end of this video, you should walk away knowing how to read, append, and write data into a file so that you can take data from a messy format and put it into a cleaner CSV format so that it makes your life a lot easier when it comes to analyzing data. So let's get into it. Okay, so there's three main steps when it comes to file input and output in Python. So first, you have to open the file. Second, you have to read, write, or append the data into the file. And lastly, you have to close the file. So let me show you a very basic example of these three steps in action. Okay, so now let's see what this code does on my screen. So if I run this on VS Code, I can see that there's a new CSV file created and it says hello in it. The first line of code, basically, it tells Python what the name of the file should be and what file we should open. And this W basically indicates the mode of what we're going to do in the second step, which in this case is write, because that's what the W stands for. Now in this second line of code, we're going to use the write method and pass in the data that we want to be displayed inside the file. And so the write method overwrites any other existing data in the file. So if I did have some other data in my file.csv, then all of that data would be replaced with this hello. And finally, the third line of code is just saying file.close, which basically closes the file. And it's important to do this or else the data isn't going to be written into the file properly. Okay, now I'm going to move over to my screen and show you a more complex example. And the good thing about this example is that I'm going to show you a function where you don't have to manually close the file every time, because the function is automatically going to take care of that. All right, so I have the data stored in a dictionary and it's on college data. I just found it online. I manually entered it myself. And so the key names represent the keys in this case represent the columns that I want to have in the CSV file that we're going to create. And then for the values, we have them stored as lists. And each individual element in the list represents a data point. And so I also imported the CSV module because that's going to allow us, it's going to give us access to functions that will convert this data in the dictionary into the CSV file that we want. And so remember how I said before that we had to say file.open and file.close every time we wanted to put data into a file. But with this function that I'm about to show you, you don't have to worry about that because it's going to automatically take care of opening and closing it by itself. And so the function is called with, and then you're going to say open, and inside parentheses you're going to pass in the name of the file that you want to store the data in. And so in this case, I'm going to say collegedata.csv. And you can name it whatever you want. This is just something that I prefer. And then in this second parameter, you want to pass in how you want to put in or store the data. And so there's read, write, or append. But in this case, I'm just going to do write for this video. So I'm going to say W. You just specify the first letter of the mode. And I'm also going to pass in another parameter. This one is optional, but I'm going to say this because if I don't put this parameter in, then in between each row of the CSV file, there's going to be an extra space. But I don't want an extra space, so that's why I'm just putting in an empty string like this so that it cuts out that extra space in between. And so you'll see what I mean later after I build this whole code out. But yeah, that's pretty much all we're gonna do for this open method. And then I'm going to say as f. And so this is the standard notation of using this function. Now we just have to worry about adding all the the data into the file with the function. But before I do that, I'm gonna specify the column names first. So I'm gonna say fields, and then I'm gonna use a list to store all these column names. So I'm just gonna copy and paste the keys from the dictionary. And so it just stores data. All the data that's gonna be stored is the university names and the in-state tuitions and the acceptance rates. And let me just copy this. And you can tell that these are all public schools because I just chose to do it on public schools because I don't know, I just kind of felt like it. And I only picked the in-state tuitions because they're a lot cheaper. And also the acceptance rates. Okay, so now I'm going to create an object using a class from CSV called dictionary writer. And so I'm gonna say writer is equal to csv.dictionary writer. And inside the parentheses, I'm gonna pass in the name of the file, which within this function we said it's f. And then the second parameter is going to be the column headers. And so that's going to be everything inside this fields variable. So we're going to say that. And so now this writer object has access to even more functions and methods that we can use to make it, it's going to make it a lot easier for us to add data. And so now I'm going to use a for loop because we want to go through each element in the list of the values of this dictionary, and we want to add them to the corresponding column headers. And so to do that, we first have to get the total number of rows in this dictionary, which is, I'm going to say num rows. And to do that, we just have to get the length of one of these lists, because like I said before, each element is a data point, and so the length of all the elements in this list represents the number of data points, which represents the number of rows. And so I'm gonna say college data dot values, and so this is going to return all three of these lists over here, but we only need one of the lists to get the length of, to get the total number of rows. And so to do that, we can convert this into an iterable by saying iter, wrapping it around with parentheses. And then this will allow us to perform more functions because it's an iterable now. And so there's a helpful function called next, and that returns the next item in this iterable, which technically is the first item in the iterable, which is this first list over here. And so now that this line returns the first list, we only want to get the length of it now. And so we just wrap it around with the length function, and this is going to this num rows is now going to store the total number of rows. So hopefully that makes sense, and pause and rewind if there's something that was a little bit unclear, and feel free to ask it below in the comments. Okay, now I'm gonna create a for loop to add each individual row data into the corresponding column headers. So to do that, I'm going to say for I in range num rows. And so this I is going to represent it's going to represent the position of the value or of the list. And so I'm going to create an empty dictionary called row dictionary, and this is going to store data for only each individual row. So what I mean by that is, for example, if we're on the first iteration of this for loop, then we're going to have this dictionary is going to store only the first element of the list for all the keys. So it's only going to store UW, it's only going to store 13406 and 42.5, because those are all the first elements of all of the lists. And we're going to add that into this dictionary called row dictionary. And then we're also going to use these keys too. So we're going to create a key value pair. The key is going to be the same as before, but the value is only going to store the first element. And then in the second iteration, we're going to do the same thing as the first iteration, but this time we're going to look at the second elements, and we're going to add key value pair. So the keys are the same as this, but then the values are only going to represent the element that corresponds with the iteration. And so each iteration is going to reset to an empty dictionary, because we don't care about the previous rows, because the previous rows, that's already been taken care of. And so to do this, we're going to use a nested for loop. And so to do that, we're going to say for key in college data dot keys. And so now this inner for loop is going to loop through all of these keys, these key names. I'm going to say, or we want to create new key value pairs in this empty row dictionary. So I'm going to say row dictionary, and then the key is going to be the same as these, and the value is going to be I say college data, and then I pass in the key. And so this is going to give me the value. It's going to give me, like, let's say the key is university name. So college data, university name, this is going to give me this list. And then with this list, remember, we can use indexing in Python to extract a specific element from that list. And so we're going to use the outer loop variable called I to do that. And so, like, let's say this was the first iteration and I was 0. So college data, and then if the key was university name, it would be this whole list. And then now we have this second pair of brackets calls the specific element from the list that we want. So in the first iteration, the I would be 0 and UW would be returned. So now that this row dictionary contains the individual row data stored in a key value pair, we're going to use a method from the writer object called write row, and we're going to pass in a dictionary with the row dictionary. And so this write row, it's going to see that all the values correspond to the column headers. And so it's automatically going to map the values with the column headers that it corresponds with. So hopefully I know that was a lot of information. Hopefully that made sense. I'm going to run this now and let's see what happens. So I'm going to save this first, and then I'm going to run it. Then you can see on the side, this left-hand side, it created a new file called collegedata.csv because we didn't have it before. And okay, we have the data here, but there's actually something I forgot to do. I didn't realize this, but I forgot to write the headers down. And so that's just a simple one line of code. All I have to do is say writer.write header, and this is going to write all of these field names, and it's going to automatically write them as the column headers. So that was my bad. I forgot to do that. But if I rerun that, and now if I check it, okay, now the column headers are showing like they're supposed to, and they're separated by commas. Each each column is separated by commas because it's a CSV, which basically means comma separated values. And I also wanted to show you something else. And I'm not going to go too in depth with this, but there's also an append mode you can do. So if I change this to A instead of W, then it's not going to overwrite any of the previous data that we have. So let me just run that real quick. If I take a look at that, it's just gonna add everything in this function to the bottom of the existing data that we have before over here. And so it depends on what kind of situation you're dealing with, but in this case there's no reason to say append, so I'm just gonna say write, and if I run that again, it's going to overwrite everything in the file with this data. So if I go back, it's gonna go back to normal. Alright, I hope you learned something new in this video. If you want to learn another tool that's really useful in the data science field, then check out this video over here on Pandas data frames. But if that video is not out yet, then make sure to check out this one on dictionaries. It's the previous video in this playlist, and I highly encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. So thank you for watching, and hope you see you in one of those videos.